That Thursday night, I came home earlier than usual and found out my wife was getting ready to pretend she wanted to leave me. She was not planning to end our marriage for real. She was doing it because her friends talked her into turning my life into some kind of game. They told her it would be a smart way to measure how much I loved her. I almost never got off work that early, so nobody expected me. When I stepped inside, the house was still, but I could hear voices from the living room. They were low and muffled, but clear enough once I got closer. My wife had her phone on speaker. Right away, I recognized the women talking. It was her 3 best friends, the same ones who had been feeding her poison about relationships for months. I stopped in the hallway where they could not see me, but I was close enough to catch every word. One of them said, "Just tell him you need time to think about your future and whether this marriage is really making you happy. A man never values what he has until he thinks he is about to lose it." Another one jumped in and said, "That is right. My cousin did the same thing to her boyfriend last year. He panicked, begged her not to go, and a week later he bought her a new car." Then I heard my wife. She sounded unsure, but not unsure enough to shut it down. She said, "But what if he just says fine? What if he does not try to stop me?" One of them laughed softly and answered, "Trust me, sweetheart. No husband is going to let his wife walk away without a fight. He will cry, promise to change, and probably start acting like the perfect man overnight." The second I heard that, my whole body tightened. My marriage was being treated like entertainment, like a little experiment they could run for fun. But what hit me hardest was hearing my wife sit there and seriously think about doing it. She said, "I do not know. It feels wrong. It feels like I would be messing with his head." The first friend came back fast. "It is not messing with him. It is a test. You have every right to know how important you are to him. If he truly loves you, he will fight for you. If he does not, then at least you will finally know where you stand." A few seconds passed. Then I heard my wife let out a long breath. "When should I do it?" she asked. One of them answered right away, "This weekend. Make it emotional, but do not go too far. Just tell him you have been thinking and you are not sure you are happy anymore." At that point, my hands were curled into fists at my sides. These women were pushing my wife to wreck our marriage just to create drama. And the worst part was that she was listening to every bit of it. Another friend said, "And whatever you do, stay serious. Do not smile. Do not give him any clue that it is fake. Let him sit in it for a few days. See what he does to win you back." Then one of them laughed and said, "You better keep notes. This is going to be unbelievable." That was enough for me. I backed away as quietly as I could, opened the front door, and stepped back outside. My head was spinning. Part of me wanted to walk right in there and call all of them out on the spot. I wanted to tell them exactly what kind of people they were. But I did not do that, because while I stood outside, another idea started coming together. If my wife wanted to play games with our marriage, then she was about to learn something about me that her friends clearly did not understand. I am not a man who begs. I do not chase people. I do not put on a show for somebody else's amusement. I got in my truck and drove around for a while, just long enough to cool off and think straight. About 20 minutes later, I came back home. Her friends were gone by then. My wife was in the kitchen fixing dinner like everything was normal. She smiled when she saw me and said, "Hey, you are home early." Then she leaned in and kissed my cheek. A few minutes earlier, I would have taken that as affection. Now it felt fake. I said, "Traffic was easy today," and washed her face while I said it. She looked uneasy. She kept twisting a kitchen towel in her hands like she could not settle down. During dinner, she barely said anything. I could tell she was thinking hard, probably running through whatever little speech her friends had helped her build. I acted normal. I ate my dinner, made regular conversation, and gave her no sign that I knew a thing. But inside, I was already preparing for what was coming. That night in bed, she tossed and turned beside me. She could not get comfortable. I could almost hear her thoughts. She was probably arguing with herself, deciding whether to go through with the stunt or back out of it. I already knew what she was going to do. Her friends had gotten in her head, and people like that do not stop once they get something started. They keep pushing until the damage is done. What my wife did not understand, and what those self-appointed relationship experts definitely did not understand, was simple. I do not play mind games with people I love, and I do not stay calm when somebody tries to play them with me. If she wanted to see whether I would fight for our marriage, then she was about to find out that I do not fight to keep someone who is willing to treat me like a joke. If a person says they do not want me, I do not chase them down the street. I do not beg them to stay. I do not humiliate myself just to make them feel wanted. Saturday was coming, and I was ready for it. She thought she was setting up some emotional test. Her friends thought they were about to watch me break down and perform for them. Instead, they were about to deal with a man who knew exactly who he was and had no interest in being manipulated. And the truth was, my wife had no idea that this little test of hers was about to go in a direction she never imagined. Saturday morning came, and sure enough, so did the performance. I was out in the garage sorting through some tools when she appeared in the doorway. She had that stiff look on her face like she had practiced this moment more than once. She said, "We need to talk." Her voice had that serious, careful tone people use when they are trying to sound deep and important. I looked up at her and stayed perfectly calm. I said, "All right, what is going on?" She took a breath like she was getting ready to step on stage. Then she said, "I have been thinking a lot lately. About us. About our marriage. And I am not sure I am happy anymore." I nodded slowly, like this was the first time I had heard anything like it. Then I asked, "What exactly is making you unhappy?" That threw her off right away. I could tell she had expected me to panic, start apologizing, or ask what I had done wrong. Instead, she had to actually explain herself. She said, "It just feels like we are stuck in the same routine all the time. I do not know if this is how I want to live for the rest of my life. I think I need some space." I set down the wrench I was holding and said, "Space? What kind of space?" She hesitated and then said, "Maybe we should take a break. Spend some time apart so I can think and figure out what I really want." I wiped my hands on a rag and leaned back against the workbench. I said, "How long are you talking about?" She blinked. "I do not know. Maybe a few weeks. Maybe a month." I nodded and said, "A month. All right. When do you want to start?" Her eyes widened a little. That was not the reaction she had prepared for. She said, "You are okay with that?" I shrugged and answered, "You said you need space. If that is what you need, then fine. I am not going to trap you in a marriage you say is making you unhappy." The color left her face. She said, "But do you not want to talk about it? Try to fix things?" I looked at her and said, "What is there to fix right now? You told me you are unhappy and that you want space. I am listening to you." That was when real panic started creeping into her face. This was supposed to be the moment where I fell apart. This was where I was supposed to beg, promise, cry, and offer to become a whole new man just to keep her. Instead, I was making it easy. She said, "So that is it? You are just giving up?" I answered, "No. I am respecting what you said. You are a grown woman. If you are telling me this is what you want, I am not going to stand in your way." Then I walked past her toward the house. I said, "I will move my things into the guest room today so you can have the bedroom to yourself. We should also figure out the bills while we are doing this." She hurried after me and said, "Wait, you are moving out of the room now?" I said, "You asked for space. I figured that meant actual space too." She followed me inside, and by then the calm act she had been putting on was falling apart. She said, "I did not mean right this second. I thought maybe we would talk through the details first." I opened the dresser and started pulling out clothes. I said, "The details seem pretty clear. You want time away from me so you can decide whether you still want this marriage. The faster we start, the faster you will get your answer." She stood in the doorway, staring at me like she had no idea what to do next. Nothing was going the way her friends had promised. Then she asked, "Do you not have any questions? Do you not feel anything about this?" I stopped for a second and looked right at her. I said, "Of course I feel something. But if you are telling me my love is not enough for you to be happy here, then I do not see much point in putting on a speech." She said, "That is not what I meant." I answered, "You said you are not sure you want the rest of your life with me. That sounds pretty clear to me." Right then her phone buzzed. I did not have to guess who it was. It was probably one of those friends checking in to see whether I was crying yet. I kept folding clothes and said, "I might call a couple of my buddies and go get dinner tonight. Since we are taking a break, I guess we should both start getting used to being on our own." She looked at me and quietly said, "On our own?" I said, "That is what a break means, does it not? Time apart. Space. Living separately enough to think clearly." I could see her mind racing. She was trying to figure out how to stop this without admitting the whole thing was fake. Then she said, "I think you are taking what I meant the wrong way." I said, "Am I?" Because from where I am standing, it sounds like you want the freedom to decide whether you still want to be married to me. That makes us separated until you decide." She sat down on the bed hard, like the strength had gone out of her legs. Then she asked, "Where are you going to dinner?" I said, "I do not know yet. Maybe that new steak place downtown. I have not gone out with the guys in a long time." The truth was I had not made any plan at all, but I could tell just hearing it bothered her. She was probably picturing me out somewhere laughing, eating, maybe enjoying my life while she sat at home watching her little game backfire. She looked at me and said, "You seem really calm." Her voice was shaky by then. I stopped packing and said, "Would you rather I be upset? Because I can be upset if that makes this easier for you." She shook her head fast. "No, that is not what I mean. I just thought you would react more." I said, "I am reacting. I am giving you exactly what you asked for." She did not answer that. She just sat there while I kept moving my things. Her phone buzzed again. This time she did not even pick it up. By then the game was fully underway, but it was not turning out the way she or her friends had pictured. Instead of watching a husband beg to keep his wife, she was watching me calmly prepare for life without her. Every move I made was steady, practical, and final. And the part that mattered most was this. She had started all of it. By Sunday evening, she was a wreck. I went out with my friends like I said I would. I stayed out until midnight, came home relaxed, and acted like the world had not ended. She was still awake when I walked in, waiting for me. That alone told me how badly this was eating at her. Back when we were supposedly doing fine, she never stayed up for me like that. She tried to sound casual and asked, "How was your night?" I said, "It was good. Really good, actually. I forgot how nice it feels to be out without having to rush back home or worry about keeping somebody else happy." Her face changed right away. She said, "What is that supposed to mean?" I told her, "It means we are on a break, right? So I do not have to check in. I do not have to think about whether somebody else is satisfied with me every second. It feels freeing." She looked like she was choking on the very thing she created. All weekend long, her phone had been going off over and over. No doubt her friends were asking for updates, waiting to hear about my breakdown, expecting some dramatic success story. Instead, their little plan had turned into something else entirely. By Monday morning, things had already shifted hard. I was in the kitchen making coffee when she came in wearing her robe. She looked worn out, like she had barely slept all night. She stood there for a second and then said carefully, "I have been thinking about what I said on Saturday." I looked at her over my coffee cup and said, "That is good. Thinking was supposed to be the whole point of this break." She swallowed and said, "Maybe I rushed into it. Maybe instead of taking a break, we should try marriage counseling." I turned toward her fully and leaned back against the counter. "Counseling?" I said, "But you told me you were not sure you wanted to spend your life with me. That is a lot bigger than a few appointments with a counselor. What exactly would we be trying to fix?" She shifted her weight and looked down. "I think I was overwhelmed," she said. "Work has been a lot, and maybe I let that spill over into how I was looking at our marriage." I nodded like I was considering it. "Stress?" I said slowly. "Sure. Stress can do a lot. I guess it can even make somebody question whether she wants to stay married to her husband." She flinched at that. "I never said I did not love you," she said. I answered, "No, you did not say those exact words. But you did tell me you were unhappy, that you needed distance, and that you were unsure about what you wanted. Those are not small things." I poured my coffee and picked up my keys. Then I said, "And honestly, after having a couple of days to think too, maybe this break is doing exactly what it was supposed to do." She frowned right away. "What does that mean?" I looked at her and said, "It means I am starting to realize how much of myself I had been pouring into somebody who still said she was unhappy. It has actually been good to step back and focus on myself for once." Her lips parted in disbelief. "You are saying you like this?" I shrugged. "I am saying I am learning some things. Mostly about what I will accept and what I will not accept from somebody I am with." That hit her hard, and I could see it. Later that day, she called me at work. She almost never called me in the middle of the day, so I already knew she was rattled. When I answered, she said, "Can we have dinner together tonight? Just dinner. Just to talk." I let a moment pass before I answered. "I do not know if that is a great idea," I said. "You told me you needed room to think clearly. Spending extra time together might just make things more confusing for you." Her voice got soft. "Please, just dinner." I let out a slow breath, like I was not sure. Then I said, "All right, but only if you are certain it will not interfere with whatever decision you are trying to make." That night at dinner, she tried everything she could think of to back away from the fake breakup without actually admitting it had been fake. She kept circling around the issue, hoping I would meet her halfway and make it easy. At one point she said, "I think maybe I made things sound bigger than they really were on Saturday. Maybe I do not need a real break. Maybe we just need to make some changes." I cut into my steak and said, What kind of changes? She said, I do not know. We could make more time for each other. Go out more. Take little weekend trips. Have date nights again. I nodded once. Those all sound like things we could have done before you told me you were unhappy in this marriage and needed space to figure out whether you still wanted it. I said. So what changed? She had no good answer. She was trapped by her own setup. If she admitted she was never truly unhappy, then she would have to explain why she had staged the whole thing. So instead, she tried to dress it up. Finally, she said, maybe I needed to feel like I could lose something before I realized how much it mattered to me. I set my fork down and looked at her straight. But you have not actually lost anything, I said. We are still married. You were the one who asked for distance, so you could decide whether you wanted to stay that way. She leaned forward a little and said, maybe I do not need a whole month. I said, are you sure? Because changing your mind every few days about something this serious does not exactly make me think you have clarity. By then she was getting irritated. She said, you are making this harder than it needs to be. I took a sip of water and answered, no. I am taking your words seriously. You said you needed space. I am making sure you have it. By Wednesday, she had gotten more desperate, and I could tell she was running out of ways to steer the thing back without telling the truth. That evening she tried another angle. She said, maybe the real problem is not us. Maybe it is just that work and everything else have gotten in the way. Maybe we have not had enough real time together. I nodded. That could be part of it, I said. Except you did not say we needed better scheduling. You said you were not sure you wanted to spend your life with me. That sounds a lot bigger than needing more time on weekends. She rubbed her hands together and said, I was overwhelmed. I did not mean every word literally. I looked at her and said, so when you told me you needed to step back and figure out whether you wanted to be married to me, that was not literal? She opened her mouth, then shut it again. There was no clean way out for her. Everything she said just made the lie harder to hold together. Thursday night, she pushed even harder. I was in the guest room reading when she came to the doorway and stood there for a second before speaking. What if I told you I made a mistake? She asked. What if I said I do not want this break anymore? I put my book down and looked at her. Then I would say you need to be absolutely certain, I told her. She frowned. What does that mean? It means this week showed me something I cannot ignore, I said. When life gets hard, your first move is not to talk to me or work with me. Your first move is to question the whole marriage. So how am I supposed to trust that this will not happen again the next time you have a rough week? She stared at me, and I could tell she understood what was happening. I was taking the fake problem she invented and turning it into a real one. She said, you are punishing me. I shook my head. No, I said. I am protecting myself. That is not the same thing. Then Friday morning came, and that was when I overheard her on the phone with her friends again. This time, the tone was completely different. She sounded frustrated and scared. I heard her say, this is not working at all. He is not chasing me. He is not trying to fix anything. He is acting like he is fine with all of this. He almost seems better. Then one of her friends said, then push it further. Tell him you are thinking about divorce. That will get a reaction. I stood there quietly and smiled to myself. They still thought they were in control. They still thought one bigger line, one sharper threat, would make me panic and come running. They had no idea how badly they were about to misread me again. Friday evening, right on schedule, she sat me down and put on the most serious face she had used all week. She said, I have been doing a lot of thinking during this break, and I am starting to wonder if maybe this should be permanent. I looked at her like I was weighing it carefully. Then I said, permanent how? She hesitated and said, maybe we should think about divorce. If we are both better off apart, maybe that is the truth. I nodded slowly and let a second pass. Then I said, you know what? Maybe you are right. The look on her face changed instantly. Her eyes went wide, and it was like all the air left the room. I kept going. I have actually been thinking something similar, I said. This week has shown me a lot. Maybe we really are not right for each other in the long run. She looked at me like I had hit her. That line had not been supposed to make me agree. It was supposed to scare me into doing exactly what she wanted. Instead, I was standing there accepting it. She said, you want a divorce? I answered, I want to be with somebody who is sure she wants to be with me. And you have made it very clear that you are not that person. At that point, the whole thing was crashing down around her, and both of us knew it. Saturday morning, exactly 1 week after she had put on that first little performance in the garage, she was pacing in the kitchen like she was losing her mind. I was sitting there calmly eating breakfast, and reading the news on my tablet. Finally, she snapped. She said, "Okay, stop. Just stop all of this." I looked up and said, "Stop what?" "This act," she said. "This whole calm, polite, understanding routine you have been doing all week." I set my tablet down slightly and looked at her. "I still do not know what you mean," I said. "You told me you wanted space. Then you started talking about divorce. I have just been respecting what you said." She slammed her coffee mug down on the counter. "No, you have not," she said. "You were supposed to fight for us. You were supposed to care that your wife is walking away." I stayed calm and said, "My wife is not walking away. My wife is supposedly trying to make a thoughtful decision about whether she wants to stay married. I am letting her do that." She threw her hands up. "There is no thoughtful decision," she said. "God, you are making this impossible." I stood up, set the tablet aside, and gave her my full attention. Then I said, "Help me understand something. Are you upset because I am not begging you to stay, or are you upset because I am taking your words seriously?" She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. She knew the question cornered her. Finally, she said, "I am upset because you do not seem to care about losing me." I walked around the kitchen island and stopped across from her. Then I said, "Here is what I care about. I care about being with someone who actually wants to be with me. I care about having a wife who communicates instead of threatening the marriage every time she feels insecure. And I care about not wasting my life on somebody who is unsure about me." Her face lost color. She said quietly, "I never said I did not love you." I answered, "You did say you were not sure you wanted to spend your life with me. And after this week, I have started to understand just how serious that really is." She stared at me and said, "What is that supposed to mean?" I leaned against the counter and looked right at her. "It means I learned something important about you," I said. "When pressure shows up, your instinct is not honesty. It is not teamwork. It is not trust. Your instinct is to shake the foundation of the relationship and see what happens." She shook her head fast. "That is not fair," I said. "You literally told me you wanted to separate so you could decide whether you still wanted me. That is not healthy communication. That is emotional manipulation." The word hit her hard. I could see it in her eyes. She said, "I was not manipulating you." I let out a slow breath. "Really?" I said. "Because from where I stand, it looks like you created a crisis to measure my devotion and get a reaction. That sounds exactly like manipulation." Now she was panicking. She said, "You are twisting everything." I said, "Am I? Let me ask you something simple. Do you actually want a divorce?" She answered right away, "No." "Do you actually want to separate?" "No." "Were you truly unhappy in this marriage last Saturday morning?" That one took longer. She hesitated, and in that pause I got all the confirmation I needed. Then she said, "Things were not perfect." I looked at her and said, "That is not what I asked. Were you honestly planning to leave me?" She hesitated again. Then she said, "I was confused." I nodded slowly. "Confused about what?" I asked. "About whether I appreciated you enough, so you decided to put our marriage on the line and see how I would react." She said, "I did not put anything on the line. I just said I needed space." I gave her a hard look. When a wife tells her husband she needs to step away and think about whether she wants to stay married, most people would call that a threat to the marriage. She was running out of room with every answer. Then she said, "You are making it sound worse than it was." I said, "How exactly should it sound?" Because from my side, my wife looked me in the eye and said she was unhappy and might want out. There is not a nicer way to hear that. Right then her phone buzzed on the counter between us. Without thinking, she glanced down at it, and I saw the change in her face. That was the moment I decided to end it. I looked at the phone, then back at her, and said, "Your friend's checking in to see how the test is going?" She went completely still. All the color drained out of her face. She said, "What test?" I did not even blink. "The one where you pretend you want to leave me so you can see how hard I will fight for you," I said. "The one they talked you into last Thursday night. How is that working out so far?" Her mouth dropped open. "I do not know what you mean," she said, but her voice was already breaking. I looked straight at her and said, "I heard the whole conversation. Every word. I heard them tell you to fake needing space. I heard them tell you to keep a straight face. I heard them say men only appreciate what they are about to lose. I even heard the part where one of them laughed and said this would be great drama." She took a step backward like I had shoved her. Her voice came out thin and shaky. "You heard that?" I said, "I heard all of it." Tears started building in her eyes, but I kept going. "So let me ask you again," I said. "Were you actually unhappy in our marriage, Or were you running some ridiculous emotional experiment on your husband because your friends thought it would be entertaining? She shook her head and started crying. It was not like that. I said, then what was it like? She wiped at her face and said, they told me it would show me how you really felt. They said it would make things clear. I laughed once, but there was no humor in it. And what exactly did it show you? I asked. She looked at me through tears and said, I do not know anymore. I nodded. You want to know how I feel? I said, I feel like I married somebody who would rather manipulate me than talk to me honestly. I feel like my wife trusted her friends more than she trusted her marriage. And I feel like I spent a week being treated like some kind of lab experiment by the one person who was supposed to love and respect me. She was crying hard by then, but I was not done. The worst part is not even that you tried this, I said. The worst part is that when it did not work, you were willing to take it further. You brought up divorce just to force a reaction out of me. You were ready to set fire to the whole marriage for a game. She covered her face and said, I am sorry. I know it was wrong. I am so sorry. Do you really? I asked. Because you spent a full week building on the lie instead of telling me the truth. She was crying hard by then. I did not know how to fix it. You could have fixed it the second you decided to be honest, I said. Instead, you kept digging. She broke down even more, but I did not let that stop me. I had been preparing for this moment all week. I told her, this is what happens now. You are going to call your friends and tell them exactly how their little test turned out. You are going to tell them their manipulation almost destroyed our marriage. And then you are going to decide whether you want to be married to me or married to their approval. She looked at me through tears and said, I choose you. I choose us. I shook my head. That is easy to say now. But you already picked their game over this marriage once. Why should I believe you now? She had nothing to say to that. The game was over, but the damage was real now. That evening, I got the perfect chance for the next step. Her friends were having their usual monthly dinner party, and we were both invited. Normally, I would have found a reason not to go, but this time, I wanted to be there. While she was getting ready, she looked nervous and said, maybe we should skip it tonight. After everything that happened. I adjusted my collar and said, no, I think we should go. I have a few things I want to say to your friends. Her face went pale. What kind of things? She asked. I said, just a little talk about how their relationship advice worked out. When we got there, the party was already going. The same 3 women who had pushed her into all this were there, along with a few other couples. Perfect. My wife tried to guide us toward a quiet corner, but I walked straight over to them. Ladies, I said, I wanted to thank you for the excellent marriage advice you gave my wife last week. They all looked at each other. One of them forced a smile and said, what advice? I said, the phone call where you told her to fake a breakup so she could test how devoted I was. Pretty creative idea. People nearby started getting quiet. Another one said, I do not know what you were talking about. I looked right at her and said, really? Because I heard every word. I heard you tell her to say she needed space. I heard you tell her to make it serious. I heard the part where you said she should keep track of my reaction for drama. And I heard the backup plan about bringing up divorce if I did not react the way you wanted. Now the room had gone almost silent. My wife looked like she wanted the floor to open up under her. I kept going. The best part, I said loud enough for everyone to hear, was when she followed your plan and I called her bluff. You should have seen how fast she panicked when I agreed with the separation. One of the husbands let out a low whistle. Then he said, you all told her to fake leaving him? One of the women jumped in fast. It was not fake. We just thought she should test his commitment. I laughed. Test my commitment by lying to me and manipulating me? That is your idea of helping? She crossed her arms and said, sometimes people need to be tested. I turned to her husband and said, does your wife test you by threatening to leave for fun? He looked at her in a whole new way. Does she? I asked. Nobody said a word. My wife kept trying to catch my eye like she wanted me to stop, but I was not done. I looked around the room and said, here is what I know about tests like this. When someone tests you, it means they do not trust you. When someone manipulates you, it means they do not respect you. And when someone lies to your face for a week, they are showing you exactly who they are. One of the friends snapped, that is not fair. We were just trying to help her feel secure. I said, by teaching her to lie and play games? That is your version of security? Another husband spoke up. Wait a minute. So the whole separation was fake? I nodded. A full week of fake conflict, all built by these 3 experts right here. Now they were getting desperate. One of them said, you are making it sound worse than it was. I looked at her and said, "Am I?" My wife lied to me for a week, threatened our marriage, and even brought up divorce because you three thought it would be entertaining to see how I reacted. That got people murmuring all over the room. The other wives looked disgusted. The husbands looked uneasy and suspicious. My wife leaned toward me and whispered, "Please, we should go." I said, "Why?" "We are just getting to the important part." Then I looked at her friends and said, "Tell them how the test worked out." Did I beg like you said I would? Did I panic? No. When my wife said she wanted to separate, I started giving her the space she asked for. When she talked about divorce, I agreed that maybe it was for the best. Everybody was listening now. Then I said, "Turns out when you call somebody's bluff, they panic fast." One of the women made one last try. "We only wanted her to know her worth," she said. I looked her dead in the eye. A woman's worth is not measured by how desperately her husband reacts to being manipulated, I said. It comes from honesty, loyalty, and respect. Your advice attacked all three. At that point, the party was finished whether anybody admitted it or not. People started making excuses and leaving. Nobody wanted to stand around pretending this was normal. On the way to the car, my wife did not say a word. Once we got inside, she finally asked, "Did you really have to humiliate them like that?" I started the engine and looked at her. "They humiliated themselves," I said. "I just made sure everybody knew who helped create this mess." The message was simple. Actions have consequences. The drive home was quiet. When we got to the house, she stayed sitting in the passenger seat, staring at her hands. Finally, she said, "I know you are angry." I turned off the engine and said, "Angry is not even close. But we need to decide what happens next." Inside, I sat down at the kitchen table and motioned for her to sit across from me. I said, "Your friends probably will not be calling much after tonight. And if they do, it will probably be to blame you for exposing them instead of taking responsibility." She nodded and said, "I know. That should tell you everything you need to know about them," I said. Then I leaned forward. "Here's where things stand. You chose their entertainment over our marriage. You lied to me for a week. You turned fake problems into real damage. And when I did not react the way you expected, you pushed even harder instead of telling the truth." She started crying again, but I kept going. "So now you get one more choice. The biggest one of your life." She looked up and asked, "What choice?" I said, "You can choose to rebuild this marriage with honesty and respect. If that is what you want, then those women are out of your life. No more girls' nights with them. No more calls asking for advice. No more letting them fill your head with poison." She listened without interrupting. "Or," I said, "you can keep those friendships and lose this marriage. Because I will never be tested, manipulated, or disrespected like this again." She answered fast, "I choose you. I choose this marriage." I said, "You said that already. Words are easy. This time you are going to prove it." Her voice was shaky. "How?" I had already thought it through. "First, tomorrow you are going to call each of those friends and tell them the friendship is over. You are going to tell them their advice almost wrecked your marriage, and you are going to take responsibility for following it." Her eyes widened. All three," I said. "And you are doing it in front of me." She swallowed and said, "Okay." "Second," I said, "we are going to real marriage counseling. Not fake advice from your friends. Real counseling. Because you need to understand why you thought manipulation was acceptable at all." She nodded right away. "Yes, absolutely." Third, you rebuild trust through actions, not promises. That means full honesty about where you go, who you talk to, and what kind of advice you let into this marriage. She asked quietly, "For how long?" I looked at her and said, "For as long as it takes." She sat there in silence for a while. Then she asked, "If I do all of that, will you forgive me?" I said, "Forgiveness is not a reward for checking off a list. It happens when I see real change, real honesty, real growth." Then I stood up. "But the fact that you are willing to cut ties with those women tells me maybe you finally understand how serious this is." She said, "I do understand. I really do." I answered, "We will see. Understanding something and changing are not the same." Over the next few days, she followed through. The calls to her friends were ugly and uncomfortable, but she made them. She found a marriage counselor and set up our first appointment. She even deleted their numbers on her own. But the real moment came 2 weeks later. One of those women sent her a message trying to smooth things over. She claimed the dinner party had made her look bad and said she had just been misunderstood. My wife showed me the text and asked, "What do you think I should do?" I looked at her and said, What do you think you should do? She read the message again and then said, I think somebody who cares more about saving face than taking responsibility has not learned anything. For the first time since all of this started, I smiled. That is exactly right, I said. She blocked the number without hesitation. 6 months later, our marriage was stronger than it had been in a long time. Not because we went through a crisis, but because we finally set clear lines about what was acceptable and what was not. My wife learned that real security does not come from games, tests, or manipulation. It comes from honesty. And I learned something too. Sometimes the best way to protect a marriage is to refuse to play along with anything that threatens it. The test ended, but the lesson stayed. Some lines change everything once they are crossed. The important part is making sure the change leads somewhere better.